The Leaf sales have struggled, and the automaker failed to double sales in 2012 as it had predicted, and instead sold about the same number as in 2011. Last year, Nissan sold 9,819 Leaf EVs in the United States. That's up about 1.5% over the previous year. Just so you know, the Leaf's not the only struggling electric vehicle. Ford sold just 685 Focus EVs in 2012, and that's its first full year of sales, even though it's built 1,627, according to a report from Ford just last week. At any rate, previously, Nissan CEO Carlos Ghosn had previously predicted that 10% of all vehicles sold in 2020 worldwide will be electric vehicles. Nissan and its alliance partner, French automaker Renault, have invested $5.6 billion in electric vehicles in recent years. Ghosn told reporters in November of 2010 in Washington that the alliance would sell 500,000 EVs a year by the end of 2013. Seems a bit optimistic to me, especially given where the numbers are right now. General Motors has had to scale back its sales forecast for its plug-in hybrid, the Chevrolet Volt, after it failed to meet expectations in 2011. GM initially planned to sell 45,000 Volts in 2012, but the Volt had a much stronger year than the Leaf. GM sold 23,641, triple the number that it sold in 2011, so while they're way off the mark of their expectations, at least the Volt has picked up some market share. GM has offered hefty leasing incentives on the Volt, which helps to boost sales. While Nissan has also been offering incentives on the Leaf, Nissan says the addition of Leaf production and battery assembly has resulted in the creation of more than 300 U.S. manufacturing jobs, a number that can increase with demand. Now, there's the upside, there's the downside. The upside, a reasonable number of jobs created in the U.S., at least for a single employer in a single facility area. And yeah, it's legitimate to speculate that if demand would go up, that more jobs would be needed. That's the nature of business. But regardless, if they need that kind of change coming from the taxpayers of the country, there comes a point where the limit on the benefit has to be considered. It's not as though our government isn't already broke. Now, on to today's main topic, and that is, has Obama's passport records been sanitized? More importantly, did his pick to be the next CIA director do some, part, or all of that sanitizing? That's an interesting question, and let's take a look at it, shall we? John Brennan, the Obama counterterrorism advisor, who was nominated just last week to be the new head of the CIA, played a controversial role in what many suspect was an effort to sanitize Obama's passport records. On March 21st in 2008, amid Obama's first presidential run, 2 unnamed contract employees for the State Department were fired, and a third was disciplined for breaching the passport file of Democratic presidential candidate and then Senator Barack Obama. Breaking the story, the Washington Times on March 20th, 2008, noted that all 3 had used their authorized computer network access to look up and read Obama's records within the State Department Consular Affairs section. that happens to possess and store passport information. Contacted by the newspaper, State Department spokesman Sean McCormick attributed the violations to non-political motivations, stressing that the three individuals involved did not appear to be seeking information on behalf of any political candidate or party. As far as we can tell, in each of these three cases, it was imprudent curiosity. That was a quote from McCormick, in case you were wondering. Yeah, the spokesman did not disclose exactly how the State Department came to that conclusion, and by the next day, the story had changed. The New York Times reported on March 21st, 2008, that the security breach had involved unauthorized searches of the passport records, not just of Senator Obama, but also of then presidential contenders, Senators John McCain and Senators Hillary Rodham Clinton. Again, the New York Times attributed the breaches to garden variety snooping and idle employees. That was not politically motivated. Like the Washington Times, the New York Times gave no explanation to back up its assertion that the breaches were attributable to non-political malfeasance. Still, the New York Times report indicated then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice had spent Friday morning calling all three presidential candidates, and that she had told Obama that she was sorry for the violation. Quote, "I told him that I myself would be very disturbed if I learned that someone had looked into my passport file." The newspaper quoted Obama as saying he appreciated the apology, but that he expected the passport situation, quote, "to be investigated diligently and openly." One has to question what Obama's definition of an open investigation is these days after having seen him in action. At any rate, according to the New York Times, Obama's tone of concern was obvious. Quote, "One of the things that the American people count on in their interactions with any level of government is that if we have to disclose personal information, that it's going to stay personal and stay private." Obama also told reporters, "And when you have not just one, but a series of attempts to tap into people's personal records, that's a problem, not just for me, but for how our government is functioning." The New York Times noted that the files examined likely contained sensitive personal information, including social security numbers, addresses, and dates of birth, as well as passport applications and other biographical information that would pertain to U.S. citizenship. Only at the end of the article did the New York Times note that the State Department spokesman McCormick had emphasized the most egregious violations appeared to have been made against Obama. Obama was the only one of the three presidential candidates involved who had his passport file breached on three separate occasions. The first occurred January 9th, 2008, followed by a separate violation February 21st and March 14th, also in 2008. Moreover, all three of the offending employees had breached Obama's files, while each of the passport files of McCain and Clinton had been breached only once. Now, asking the question of what exactly the Brennan connection is, we'll take that up right after this brief commercial break. Welcome back to Tap Into the Truth. As we continue on the topic, now we get to the crux of why Mr. Brennan may be involved with sanitizing these particular passport records. The New York Times noted that two offending State Department contract employees who were fired had worked for Stanley Inc., a company based in Arlington, Virginia. What else goes on in Arlington? A lot of intelligent type stuff, isn't it? Anyway, let's proceed. While the reprimanded worker continued to be employed by the Analysis Corporation of McLean, Virginia. The newspaper gave no background on either corporation other than to note that Stanley Inc. did, quote, computer work for the government. At that time, Stanley Inc. was a 3,500-person technology firm that had just won a $570 million contract to provide computer-related passport services to the State Department. Analysis Corporation was headed up by Mr. Berneman, a former CIA agent who was then serving as an advisor on intelligence and foreign policy to Senator Obama's presidential campaign. After Obama's inauguration, Berneman joined the White House as assistant to the president and deputy national security advisor for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. By March 22nd of 2008, the Washington Times reported that the State Department investigation had focused on the contract workers for the Analysis Corporation, because he was the only one of the three involved in breaching the passport records of both Obama and McCain. The two presidential candidates whose eligibility as natural-born citizens under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution were in question. Keeping with the theme that the motive for the passport breach was attributed to mischief, the three State Department contract employees received relatively light penalties for their offenses. Two were fired, and one was reprimanded. Although at the time the State Department promised a full-scale investigation, the public was kept in the dark. And in July of 2008, the State Department's Office of Inspector General issued a 104-page investigative report on the passport breach incidents, stamped sensitive but unclassified. The report also heavily redacted. It was virtually useless to the public. Sources of passages were blacked out entirely, including one sequence of 29 consecutive pages that were each obliterated by a solid black box that made it impossible even to determine paragraph structure. Investigative reporter Kenneth Timmerman said that a well-placed but unnamed source told him that the real point of the passport breach incidents was to cauterize the Obama file, removing from it any information that could prove damaging to his eligibility to be president. According to the theory, the breaches of McCain's and Clinton's files were done for misdirection purposes, to create confusion and to suggest the motives of the perpetrators were attributable entirely to innocent curiosity. Another thief enters the case. Within a few days, a new witness surfaces unexpectedly, providing evidence that the breaching passport files was an offense being perpetrated by State Department officials on a massive and everyday basis. The case centered on Lieutenant Corliss Harris, Jr., then age 24. Harris, who spelled his name differently than the officer rank, was a petty drug dealer and identity thief criminal who never served in the military or in any police or fire department. On March 25th of 2008, at approximately 9:30 p.m., Officer William A. Smith, Jr. of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, Narcotics Special Investigation Division, stopped an oncoming vehicle that had tinted windows he believed were in violation of the D.C. Tinted Window Act of 1994. After stopping the vehicle, Smith found the driver, Harris, and his female passenger had been smoking marijuana. Big surprise. Harris had stuffed in his jacket pocket a large, clear Ziploc bag containing